All right, hey everybody, on the road to Big Al here. Uh, Thought I'd do a video on. I came across this video on CNBC about the trucking shortage, why the trucking industry is so fragmented and chaotic. And while I was watching, I was going through the comments, and a lot of people were talking about how there's no truck driver. Um, they didn't interview any truck drivers, so I thought I would kind of do a reaction video to this. I'm currently an owner operator, own my own truck, have my own authority, and I've also driven for Night Transportation and Warner Enterprises, which are two of the larger companies. So I'll give you my thoughts on why there's a trucking shortage and maybe what they can do about it. All right, and we'll get into it's a 12-minute video, so this is going to be a pretty long video, so we'll get into it right here.
Trucking is a highly fragmented industry where it takes little more than a commercial driver's license and a truck to get into business. This makes it an appealing choice for workers looking to earn wages or even start their own companies. But it means the industry is subject to extreme boom and bust cycles. The COVID-19 pandemic has delivered its own challenges, including lockdowns, restrictions, troubles in the supply chain, and shocks to the broader economy. A large share of truck driving schools have shut down, some permanently, and there are shortages of new trucks which need to be replaced every few years. Drivers are badly needed, and the trucking industry has a very high turnover rate.
They're always looking for the next company that's going to pay them the most. It's not uncommon for a truck driver to have several jobs in 1 year, unfortunately.
The life of a
Yeah, I'll get into that. When I worked for Warner Enterprises, we kind of one of our first jobs working for a major carrier. And when I started in 2014, and when I started, I believe I was making 32 cents a mile. And it didn't matter how long you worked there, every truck driver made 32 cents a mile. I was on a dedicated route, and but at the end, by the time I worked there for 3 years. At the very end, they came out with a different pay structure that did pay drivers more depending on how much experience you had. I think I got up to a 35-cent raise. I'd worked there for 2 years at the time, and you had to have worked for 2 years to get that raise. And I think, if you worked there longer than 5 years, you got a raise, and if it was longer than 10 years, you got a raise. But I always found that kind of a huge problem, that they didn't pay drivers with more experience more money. And especially like these major companies have huge turnover rates. So, like somewhere between 92 to 98% turnover rate. So like, I think most drivers, if they're there for a year or 2 years, it's going to stick. They're going to stick around and be a driver. They figured it out, and they're going to do it. So why not compensate these drivers to stay with you? They put all these new drivers in. Like, for instance, when I started working at Warner, I was given an old truck, and I think they were about, maybe 6 months away from taking it off the road. And, they give these new drivers these old trucks, and if you wreck them or do damage to them, they're going to replace the truck anyway. And, I think I worked there for 4 months and I didn't have any problems, and I was given a newer truck. But like, it seems like they're more willing to put an inexperienced driver into a truck than to keep the drivers they have happy and keep them around. And I think that's a big problem. These companies need to look into this. You have a high turnover rate. The drivers who are sticking around and driving, you need to keep these guys happy.
A truck driver is not the easiest. It can mean long trips away from home and tough conditions on the road. Stiff competition among thousands of trucking companies in America for contracts and for drivers contributes to the fragmentation and chaos, and makes it difficult for companies to consolidate. Impending technological shifts, such as autonomously driven trucks, may change all of that. This could have huge implications for the future of the industry and for the roughly 3.5 million truck drivers now on America's roads.
All right, I get into this. I don't think autonomous driving is going to solve this problem in any time future, and I keep wanting to do another video on this and kind of give you my thoughts on it. We're a long ways from there not being drivers in these trucks, no matter what they say or what they think. And like the biggest problem is, I think they can figure out how to get a truck to go drive down interstate, no problem. But driving in the city, turning in intersections is a pretty complex problem to solve for autonomy, especially since a lot of these intersections aren't made for big trucks and 18-wheelers with a 53-foot trailer. They're just not made for it. And it's going to take, honestly, I think they're going to have to redo the way they build a lot of these intersections and these roads if you're going to put autonomous trucks on them. So I think in the near future, maybe what we'll have is, a truck that can do 80% of the driving, and you can have the driver, maybe when it's on interstate and you put the cruise control on, the truck can drive past other vehicles, stay consistent speed, drive down the road, follow a GPS. I still even have problems with a GPS system. Sometimes I'm in, Dallas, and they've totally they've built a brand new road that goes over it. My GPS hasn't updated the system, and you get lost. I constantly miss this intersection. So I don't know how autonomous driving will do it. But I think what will happen is, maybe in the near future, these trucks will be able to, you get it on interstate, you might be able to go back into the sleeper for 3 or 4 hours and take a break. And maybe the DOT will allow truckers, if you have these systems on your truck, they'll give you more hours, and you'll be able to, one driver will be more, efficient. In a week you get, another 7-8 hours, maybe 10 hours driving. And, it don't sound like a big deal, but, you got thousands of drivers on the road, millions of drivers on the road, and each one of them, every driver can, be that more efficient. It's going to make a big deal. But we're a long way, don't kid yourself. It's a long ways from trucks just driving down the highways with nobody in them at all. We're a long ways from ever seeing that. And this isn't going to solve this. This is not going to solve this problem in the near future.
The freight business is 12% of the global economy. 40% of the global economy is dependent in some way on freight and logistics. Like shipping, trucking is part of the massive global supply chain and logistics industry that moves goods around the world. But these two links in the chain are extremely different in some key ways. Trucking is far more fragmented than shipping is. The top 10 shipping carriers represent 85% of shipping capacity. The top 10 trucking companies, on the other hand, only account for about 12% of the total trucking capacity. The largest asset-based trucking company in the United States is Knight-Swift. Based out of Phoenix, Arizona, it had revenues of $4.7 billion in 2020. The industry total is about $800 billion. The reason the industry is so fragmented starts with the fact that the barriers to entry are quite low. Whereas it costs tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars and at least a couple years to build a single ocean-going container ship, a new truck can be bought for $150,000 to $200,000.
You can easily finance that for a bank. You don't have to have a lot of capital to do that, and you don't have to make plans that are measured in years.
Craig Fuller runs an industry news source called FreightWaves. Trucking runs in Fuller's family. Fuller's father started one of the largest privately held trucking companies in America, called U.S. Express, in 1985. His uncle started another very large company called Covenant. Fuller says the industry has changed a lot since its grandfather started in the business around the middle of the 20th century. The industry used to be highly regulated, but rules were relaxed in the late 1970s and it became a lot easier for people to get into trucking. It's a lot more competitive, but also a lot less stable and more vulnerable to these big booms and busts. As with just about any other industry, when demand is strong, businesses are incentivized to take advantage of higher prices. They purchase more trucks, hire more drivers, and boost wages to attract workers. But these are thousands of small companies, often ones that are not sharing information and that are each acting in their own interests. For example, there are 350,000 to 400,000 self-employed truck drivers alone in the United States. Independent truck drivers in small fleets make up about 90% of the industry. So the effect of
That stat actually kind of surprised me. I would have thought like these major carriers were the biggest employees, and I don't know. I think it's kind of nice that the majority are independent truckers and out there on their own, working these load boards. People like me that was able to get away from start my own business and not rely on these major carriers to employ me. I think it's a positive thing that many truck drivers are independent and own their own trucks.
thousands of small trucking companies boosting capacity to meet demand can add up quickly to an excess of supply, which in turn drives down prices and creates conditions for a bust. In the 5 years leading up to 2021, there were at least 5 freight boom and bust cycles. 2018 was a record year for the trucking industry, but 2019 was the worst year since the financial recession. For example, a remarkably high number of trucking companies filed for bankruptcy, 1,100 to be exact. That is compared to 310 in the previous year. 2020 alone produced 3 cycles. There was a dramatic surge in demand early in the year, followed by a crash, and then another surge.
When COVID hit, things did change, and it changed dramatically. For us, it was not a lot of freight. A lot of shippers were closed. There were a lot of companies that were closed. And that just, took the amount of freight that we could actually pick up. The demand wasn't there for freight. But truck drivers, they were driving. And, it was important that we keep the truck drivers on the road to get the food from point A to point B.
And the COVID-19 pandemic produced other challenges.
I'll talk about that a little bit. I during the pandemic, when it kind of started coming out, there for a while the rates were fine, but then the rates actually just dropped down to hardly anything, to the point where, you're losing money. Like thank God, well, not thank God, but the fuel prices dropped down. I actually paid $1.34 a gallon for fuel. It was the cheapest I've ever paid for fuel, and it'll probably be the cheapest I ever paid for fuel in my life. But the rates got down so low that, like, to the point where you weren't going to be making money by driving your truck. And I seriously thought about parking the truck. Like, if this continues, I'm going to have to park the truck and maybe find something else to do. Thank God the rate started going back up, and I was able to, make a living, and the prices actually boomed, and I was able to do really well. But this is one thing I, even thought at the time, this is really short-sighted that they let the rates like that drop. And, you let the rates drop, these truck drivers, go out of business, can't afford to do it. They have to park the trucks. And then people start going back to work. The freight prices start going up. You now have less drivers, and it's, the bust is going to create a boom. And, is just so short-sighted. And, the truckers who made it through that, got on the other side, the rates went way up, and we were able to make some, we've been able to make some good money, and we've been able to make pretty good money since everything came out of COVID.
One was a shortage of new trucks. A truck has a short life. Trucking companies expect to get about 3 years of good use until they turn it over to the used market, where it will be bought by shipping ports or customers who use trucks for less strenuous tasks. As of September 2021, there is a 9-month wait for a new truck, and some manufacturers are not even taking new orders. The second big issue is labor. Competition among trucking companies for drivers can be brutal. This is in part because there are so many of them, and there is not much that differentiates one from another. The employee driver turnover rate in the industry can be quite high, about 80% at larger carriers as of September 2021. A lot of that turnover is made up of people moving from one company to the next.
With truck drivers, they tend to jump around different companies, just depending on who's paying the most.
Hankins would like to retain more drivers, but frequently finds people are lured away by the promise of a pay increase as modest as a few cents per mile.
When we do feel like there's a good driver that we're going to have for a while, there's another company that could pay them an extra 5 or maybe even 10 cents more, and I can't, compete with that. I know that's not a lot of money, but over a course of per mile, it tends to add up.
Several of the largest trucking
5-10 cents a mile is a lot of a lot of money. When I got out of Warner, and I hauled fuel for a year and kind of didn't like it, and then started looking, decided to get back into going over the road. I was looking for whoever would pay me the most, and whoever was kind of close to where I lived. An extra, I put 100,000 miles on that truck in a year. 5-10 cents over 100,000 miles makes it. That's a pretty big difference. And if you want to retain these drivers, you got to figure out how to do this. Like I said. I personally think experienced drivers are, it's got to be worth it. Retraining a new driver, and that driver, getting into an accident or something, that can't be good on your bottom line. And I guarantee your experienced drivers, the guys who have been around for 5-10 years, get into way less wrecks, damage way less products than these new drivers. I'm willing to bet.
Companies have raised pay in the last several months. Knight Swift raised pay to 50 cents per mile for experienced drivers. That means if a driver covers about 100,000 miles per year, they can make about $50,000. Median pay for the industry was $47,130 in 2020.
I'll get into that. I think some of the reasons why people are attracted to this, if you're working at McDonald's or you're working at Burger King and you see that number $47,000, and you're kind of struggling, and that number really looks good to somebody who is working one of these jobs. But then when they get out on the road and they find out how difficult this is, how many hours you work, how long away from your family you are, that $47,000, like when you put an hourly, how much money these truckers make per hour, it really isn't that much. If you were working at, you're mowing lawns at the golf course and you're mowing lawns 70 hours a week, which what a truck driver actually works, you have those weeks where you drive 70 hours, but how much, you're not counting on your logbooks, you're not counting the time you're sitting at the shippers and the receivers and waiting and all of this stuff. And easily, I think, if you drive 70 hours a week, you could easily have spent 95 hours actually, working. You're not, when you're sitting you may be sitting in your sleeper while they unload that truck, but you're still working. It's at least like kind of being like on call for a lot of these jobs. I can't just, when they unload my truck, I can't just leave, I can't just go. I'm not free to do whatever I want. I have to be with that truck while they unload it. And, these trucking industries don't pay anything for overtime. You're paid by the mile. So, you're working at McDonald's and you work 70 hours a week, even if you're you're making $10 an hour, you're working 30 hours at $15 an hour, and just the sheer number of hours you're working would work up. And then like a big problem is, you're on the road for a lot of these people want you on the road for 12 days, and you're home for you're home for 2 days, and then you're back out on the road. Like as far as I'm concerned, that's like you're really not getting any time off, because if you're working a normal job, you're getting home every single night, and some jobs have Saturday, Sunday off. At the very least, you're just getting Sunday off. Um, these truckers it's like they get every bit of work out of you, and you're working, you know, in the week you're working 7 days, you're working 70 hours, and in the week where you work 5 days, you're probably working 50, 60 hours a day. And then when I was on the road, like I was thinking of this earlier, one time when I was working for night transportation, I I put in a week ahead, at least a week ahead, that I wanted home on the next following weekday or week, whatever. And I was up in Chicago trying to get back to Kansas City, and they couldn't find me a load to come back. And they finally said, okay, deadhead back to Kansas City. And I deadheaded back to Kansas City. And then when I got my paycheck on the next following week, I wasn't paid any deadhead for coming home. And basically I was, well, we didn't get you a load, we didn't get you, you know and I felt like, I gave the heads up and plenty of time that I wanted to be home, that I needed to be home. And if you had to deadhead me from Chicago to Kansas City and you couldn't get me a load, it's kind of like on you. Like, why should I 400 miles and not paid anything for that, just so I can get home? I'm like, I don't know. It upset me at the time, and I was pretty upset, and kind of got into a argument with the fleet manager, and he had to explain to me that they're in the business of moving freight. And like, I understand that, but you should guarantee that we get home. If you can't find me a load on, telling me I come home on Friday, but you can't find me a load and I have to deadhead home, I should get paid. I should get paid for that. It shouldn't be on the driver that you couldn't find the load. It should be on you. You should have had me in a spot where you knew you could get me home. And I guess that's another thing. Like, it always seemed like on Wednesday, like I'm supposed to be home on Friday, Saturday, and they would start sending me as far away from, like, Kansas City was where I wanted to be. They start sending me as far away, like literally up into the corner, up into Massachusetts. And then it's like, all right, let's try to get this guy home. Like, all right, let's try to find this perfect load to get this guy home by Saturday. And I don't know. It's just, like, I feel like a lot of these places don't take the home time that's supposed to be guaranteed, that you're supposed to get 2 days out of every 14 home. And a lot of these places don't make it a priority, or they don't make it like, it's kind of like, well, if we get them home, we get them home. Like, no, like, if I never had a family, but you're trying to get home to watch your son play a football game, or you're trying to get home, to watch your daughter in her dance recital, and you want home on that certain day. It is a big deal. If you miss that, it's a huge deal. And it seemed like the people in, that are the people who are in the office, a lot of times I felt like they didn't appreciate how important it is to get these truckers home when they needed to. They're in their office, they're working, they're getting home every single night to see their family. It's kind of like, well, what if, okay, so he don't get home on Saturday, he gets home on Sunday. Well, you just missed the entire reason why I wanted to get home. I wanted to see little Junior playing his baseball game, and now I'm not going to get to see it. I'm home Sunday and Monday when nothing's going on. I promised him I'd be home. I promised him I'd be home Saturday to watch him play baseball, and I completely missed it. Now my kid's upset. I missed it. I'm home. I'm home Monday, Tuesday. He's going to play. He's going to play Wednesday, but I got to go back out on the road again because my 2 days are up. It's kind of like I just felt like a lot of places didn't make getting you home when you needed to be home a priority.
Though it is relatively easy to enter into, truck driving is not an easy career to maintain for a long time. Truckers spend a lot of time on the road, and the lifestyle presents a lot of difficulties. Truck drivers have high levels of obesity and other health problems, and personal health remains one of the biggest reasons for the high turnover rates in the business. There are also big challenges finding parking, which means it is hard for truckers to find a safe and comfortable place to spend the night after a full day on the road. There is an
I
estimated
don't understand the parking problem. How much money the trucking industry pays in taxes to the government, and it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to just have places. They have strict regulations where they want you to pull over at certain times, and then when you get ready to pull over, there's nowhere to park these things, or you have to pull over and I've um, you know pull over on the side of the road on an off ramp, which isn't the safest place to be, and there's no places to go to the bathroom, no place to get something to eat. You get out on the East Coast, and it's terrible. If you go past 5 o'clock at night, you can't find any parking, and I don't understand. And it's one of my biggest pet peeves too. I don't like paying for parking, and some people say that that's causing the problem, a major problem. If truckers paid $10, paid $12 a night to park, there would be more parking, which there would be. But we're also paying them for fuel, and it's like kind of a pet peeve of mine is I buy $500 worth of fuel. I should be able to park my truck in your lot tonight. Like that should be part of the deal. And just like you get a free shot. You get the fuel, you get the free shower. You should also, if you buy fuel there, you should get a place to park. And I don't think I don't think that's too much to ask. We are kind of paying for this. You go into those truck stops, and you're paying a premium price for almost anything in those stores. The McDonald's and stuff, they charge more than the normal McDonald's down the road. Everything in those truck stops are more expensive. Seems like the truck stops try to gouge these truckers on everything, including parking. You want Wi-Fi at night, that's going to be $6. It's like everything. They don't give you. It's like they don't give you anything, and we're the guys that keep these truck stops going. Like I personally think the government needs to get out there and have if it's just on the side of the road with porta potties, have a place every 50 miles where you can pull over, you know, rest for the night. If there's an emergency, there's a porta potty there to go to the bathroom at the very least. Like because when I'm driving and I have to, I got a load that's got to be there at a certain time, and I can't pull over at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and I got to drive till 10 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And then at 10 and 11 o'clock at night, I'm tired. I'm out of hours. I want to find a parking spot. I've went to sometimes 5, 6 different places looking for a parking spot. And, you're ready to shut down. You're now out of hours. I don't know. Let's I was talking about the roads earlier. There's no infrastructure built for these trucks, and the same goes for parking. They've never built the infrastructure for these trucks. These trucks create a lot of money. These trucks create a lot of money in the economy. These trucks pay a lot of taxes to the government. We're paying a lot of money. We're paying you're paying 45 cents, sometimes even more than that, 45 cents a mile, 45 cents a gallon for trucks that get 7 gallons to the mile, 8 miles to the gallon. And we're putting 100,000 miles a year on. Add that up. How much is it? We pay a heavy duty truck, I think paid $550 for that, and just all the taxes you pay. And then at the end of the day, I want to pull over somewhere, you can't find a single, there's no infrastructure for us to park these things. It's just ridiculous.
Shortfall of about 600,000 parking slips nationwide. Drivers often find they have to park for the night in empty retail parking lots or even along the highway. It is a serious structural problem for the industry, but one that is unlikely to be solved soon. There isn't really a good market solution available for that kind of problem, according to industry analysts, and parking for freight carriers isn't really a top political priority, even as far as transportation issues are concerned.
The federal government is not doing enough to support parking. If you think about parking as an asset, it doesn't make sense as a property owner to really develop truck parking lots because there just isn't enough money out there to do it. And so there isn't a big investment in parking that will enable trucks to park there when they're traveling across the country. The other big issue is that if you think about where freight is often consumed, it's often in cities where real estate is much more valuable doing something other than providing parking.
Truck drivers don't have much control over their own schedules and often have to wait, sometimes hours, for crews to load or unload their trucks. These crews often have their own schedules and have little incentive to move faster to help a driver get back on the road.
It's not uncommon for a truck driver to sit somewhere 6 to 10 hours a day just to wait to be loaded or wait to be unloaded.
The trouble is truck drivers are only allowed to drive so many hours a day, and the amount of time they spend loading or unloading can count against that. These kinds of challenges incentivize a lot of drivers to seek out the best pay per mile they can find.
How these shippers and receivers have like a scheduled time for you to be there. If you show up too early, they tell you to go somewhere else. If you show up too late, they tell you too bad, reschedule. But you show up on time and then you sit there and wait 7, 8, 9 hours. I do not understand how these companies can run businesses like that. They expect you to be there on time, but when you are on time, you still have to wait 8, 9, 10 hours, and they totally ruin your clock. Then they still expect the load. The receiver still expects the load to be there on time after the shipper totally kind of screws you and wastes your entire day. And I personally think the government, that's another thing the government needs to step in on. And this detention, it should be automatic. I've made other videos where I've had a hard time collecting detention, and then even if it's just like three, they're supposed to have you loaded in 2 hours. If it's 3.5, most of the time I don't even bother with it because it's just not worth my time and getting into an argument with somebody. And I mean, it should be an automatic thing. The government should step in. They take 4 hours. Boom. Here's what it. Anything over 2 hours. You had the appointment. You showed up on time. You're here. Once you're here for 2 hours, the clock's rolling. And, not this, some of these places, it's like, there should be a standard rate, $40, $50 an hour, and get these trucks off the road, get these trucks moving. Like, there's no reason, you're not that special that, you need to keep 50, 60 trucks here waiting 8, 9, 10 hours at a time.
The challenge lies in the fact that the trucking industry is so dependent on drivers. You can't have a trucking company without drivers, and if a merger or an acquisition by one company of another angers the drivers, they might leave and go somewhere else.
How do you know you're going to retain the drivers? Anyone who's ever done M&A knows how risky M&A is because you don't know if the culture of one company the acquiring company is going to match the culture of an acquiree.
There are exceptions. Companies Knight and Swift merged in 2017 to form a nearly $5 billion company. But that deal had a lot going for it. Both Knight and Swift were Phoenix, Arizona-based companies. The managers of both firms knew each other well. Knight's founders were former Swift executives, and the companies sometimes swapped employees. They served different types of customers, so one company's business didn't really cannibalize the others. There were other features.
Knight's management team took over Swift, but Knight was much smaller than Swift. It was just that the company was much more profitable. And so one of the things that happened is that Knight, in many ways, when management took over Swift, it improved a lot of the businesses because they were able to bring a sort of a smaller company mindset to how Swift had operated.
The Canadian company TFI is probably the best example of one that can roll up smaller trucking operations, but it keeps them largely separate. It is possible that the industry could see more consolidation, and there are some technological innovations that could help that along. One is autonomous or semi-autonomous driving. Removing the driver from the truck removes one of the biggest variables involved in keeping a truck on the road. A truck without a driver would remove the challenge of recruiting and retaining drivers and allow companies to scale more easily. But there are many questions about how far off autonomous vehicles on U.S. highways are. There are numerous regulatory hurdles to getting self-driving trucks approved across the United States. Not to mention, about 3.5 million driver's jobs are at stake.
Post 2030, I think you'll see point-to-point autonomous happen. And it's going to be a slow rollout. It's not going to be something that in the initial phases happens very quickly. But once it does take hold, it promises to eliminate a large portion of the operating cost of a truck. It gives the ability for a truck to operate for longer hours than what a driver can do. And frankly, eliminates a lot of the lifestyle issues that drivers have to contend with.
Once there is autonomous driving, massive consolidation becomes a lot more feasible because it will allow companies to achieve economies of scale, just as ride-sharing companies have done. In the meantime, trucking companies continue to rely on drivers, and drivers continue to make the best of a life on the road.
You get to see the United States and how beautiful it is. Going to the countryside, through cities, going through mountains. It's a beautiful place. Traveling in Florida, you get to see a lot of the tropical side of Florida. Truck drivers mainly stay in trucking, I believe, just so that they can get away and not be confined in an office, really be able to get out and explore.
You do get to see a lot of the country, but it's at 70 miles an hour and you're in a truck. So even when you park at night, it's not like you can just you're in Nashville and you park your truck. It ain't like you can just run down and go, watch, go to the Grand Ole Opry and catch a show. You're catching this at 70 miles an hour. And a lot of times as a truck driver, it is beautiful country. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy being out on the road, breathing fresh air and doing this and seeing the country. But you don't really get to do anything. And kind of like one thing I want to be able to do is, when I retire, is maybe get a mobile home and just drive around the country. And then these these places I've seen when I've been on the road and haven't been able to stop and look at stuff, actually stop and go look at things and see things and do things, which you can't really do when you're a truck driver. But it is really cool job. You get to go all across the country. You get to do things. And just like a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks ago, I was in, set it up. So I was in Las Vegas and spent 3 or 4 days in Las Vegas and went and gambled and played some poker and stayed in my truck for a couple days and got a room for a couple days. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool like that. Have a friend in Hannibal, Missouri, and I was just in Hannibal, Missouri one Sunday and went and hung out with them and watched some football. And I don't get to see them very often because we live 5 hours apart. But it's kind of like kind of a nice thing you can do, like in the trucking industry. You can be I can be anywhere I want to be on a weekend if I schedule it that way.
The United States.
All right, that's pretty much it. If you made it all the way to the end of this, I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. I'm on the road with Big Al, and